We talk a lot about AI being overhyped. Today's guest believes it's not. Continue listening to learn how his point is connected to tech infrastructure and security.
I'm Jeetu Patel from Cisco, and you're listening to Me, Myself, and AI.
Welcome to Me, Myself, and AI, a podcast from MIT Sloan Management Review, exploring the future of artificial intelligence. I'm Sam Ransbotham, professor of analytics at Boston College. I've been researching data, analytics, and AI at MIT SMR since 2014, with research articles, annual industry reports, case studies, and now 12 seasons of podcast episodes. On each episode, corporate leaders, cutting-edge researchers, and AI policymakers join us to break down what separates AI hype from AI success. Hi listeners, thanks for joining us again. Today I'm talking with Jeetu Patel, President and Chief Product Officer at Cisco. Jeetu, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's great to be here.
Well, as we talk, Cisco equipment is probably behind 90% of the infrastructure that we're using, but some of the listeners may not be aware of all that Cisco does. So let's start off there. Jeetu, can you give us a background of Cisco and in particular your role?
Sure. I'll start in reverse order. So I run products at Cisco. So all the products that you use from Cisco, whether it be networking products, whether it be security products, whether it be data products or collaboration products, those typically are ones that I'm in charge of building and taking to market. Of course, with a very, very capable team. Essentially, the way you should think about Cisco is we are the critical infrastructure company for the AI era. So all of the plumbing that's required to make sure that people can connect, people can stay secure while they're connected, and people can make sure that they have the data platform. Those are the things that we provide to the market.
I saw a quote from you to say, well, think of us as the picks and shovels during the AI gold rush era. And for listeners who may not be aware, there's a famous or infamous statement that the people who made money in the gold rush were people who sold picks and shovels to the miners. Individual miners, some of them made it big, but some of them did not. And I think your analogy is spot on there.
Yeah. One of the things that you find when you go through these kind of massive, what I would call disruptive platform shifts, where we've all been going down a certain path with a certain set of assumptions, and then the assumptions change because a whole new set of technologies emerge, which is what AI is. What you find is the infrastructure that's required to go out and run those technologies needs to be rethought and reimagined. And anytime there's any one of these major platform shifts, the infrastructure providers tend to make out pretty well because you have to change the entire plumbing of the apparatus that's going to be used. So if you think about when automobiles were built, you now need to have roads, and you need to have expressways, and you need to have traffic lights, and you need to have a whole system in place for how automobiles actually get integrated into society. So it's not just the automobile, but everything around it needs to change. And if you think about AI right now, these data centers where these digital workers are going to live, they have to be completely reimagined because the current data center does not have the power availability and the compute requirements and the network bandwidth to be able to fulfill and satiate the needs of what an AI system would need. So you have to kind of rethink and reimagine and, as they call in technical terms, re-rack the data centers because there's racks and racks of computers and network and switching gear that actually have to be cooled in a certain way and so on and so forth. And so that entire shift is what we are in the midst of. And Cisco is a natural benefactor of it because we provide the infrastructure for the AI era.
So some of the analogies you're making, we talked about the gold rush, we talked about the internet, we talked about cars. Is artificial intelligence at that level of big deal or not?
I think it might be bigger. And the way I've seen these kind of shifts happen, imagine if Amazon.com got built in the 1600s. It would be an epically failed company because you didn't have the internet and you didn't have the underlying infrastructure on top of which Amazon could be built because you didn't have the shipping and the logistics infrastructure and the internet and all of those pieces. In a similar vein, with AI, we have the benefit of having had all of the infrastructure that's been built out to date And so when you have something that's built taking advantage of all of these things, by definition, each one of these subsequent major transformative waves tends to be bigger in impact than the previous ones, just because it was built on top of shoulders of giants of the previous innovations that had happened. And so I would say this is probably the most consequential set of inventions that we will have seen in our lifetime for sure, and probably arguably in humanity. But the thing to keep in mind is the pace of innovation and the slope at which it happens actually makes it impossible to predict what's going to happen 3 years from now, because we've compressed the time. Scientific progress will probably compound by 1,000x. And so you've compressed this time scale where it's actually, we're in a warped situation right now where humans can't make sense of this because everything's moving so fast.
Hey folks, Stephen Johnson here, co-founder of NotebookLM. As an author, I've always been obsessed with how software could help organize ideas and make connections. So we built NotebookLM as an AI-first tool for anyone trying to make sense of complex information. Upload your documents, and NotebookLM instantly becomes your personal expert, uncovering insights and helping you brainstorm. Try it at notebooklm.google.com.
Are you ready to bank smarter? MIT Federal Credit Union puts you in charge with low rates, seamless digital banking, and personalized service. Join at mitfcu.org/podcast to start your journey today. MIT Federal Credit Union is federally insured by NCUA. Actually, there's so many things to talk about in there. I think your analogy to Amazon in the 1600s is interesting because, for example, we had neural network designs back in the 1980s. We just didn't have the compute infrastructure, the data, the telecom to pull it off. And so it took all these things coming together. And I think what you're saying is that all these things are together now for us to build from.
Actually, the biggest thing that we have that we didn't have then, because of which this would have been hard to go invent, is, AI has been around for a while, but when did it actually take off? It took off on November 30th of 2022. What was so significant about that date? That's when ChatGPT was launched. What was so significant about ChatGPT? It was essentially a large, what they call language model. And a large language model was a model that actually understood human language rather than the machine having to be rigid and the human having to learn the machine's language. It became the other way around. How did that happen? That happened because we had petabytes and petabytes of publicly available data on the internet that you could use to train these models so that these models would then know what to do with it. And so if you didn't have the internet, you would have not had AI because you would have not had that level of data to then train the models on. It goes back to our point of each one of these inventions or revolutions is built on the infrastructure provided by the previous revolution. And it's very evident in this case.
One of the last conversations that I had with my grandfather was how much life had changed from no electricity, limited indoor plumbing, no airplanes, no space travel, no computers, to, when he passed, how radically different that was. And I remember talking with him at the time saying, oh, wow, you lived through a bunch. I can't imagine things changing as much during my lifetime. And I may very quickly be eating those words.
And I think we get into this kind of cycle of, like, humans are not very good in general at imagining the exponential outcomes. We're very good at imagining linear progression, but not the exponentiality of the outcome. And so what ends up happening is we think about exponentiality in a single dimension, not multidimensional. And there was years ago, I'd had a chance to sit down and talk to Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the scientists at Google. And this was like 20 years ago or something. And I was interviewing him for something. And we were talking about this notion of perpetual extension of life, where, can a human live forever, live long enough to live forever? And he had written this book where his thesis at the time was, if you live until you're 40, we will have the science and technology to allow us to live in perpetuity. My topic of communication with him was around the social implications of that. I'm like, what happens if 7 generations live simultaneously or 10 generations live simultaneously? That's going to be really hard because we are not going to have enough room to put everyone, and we're not going to have enough crops to go feed everyone. And he's like, this is the problem with humans is we can't think in exponential terms because we think in a single dimension of exponentiality, which is if 7 generations or 10 generations lived simultaneously, what would happen with everything else being exactly the same? But the reality is you might have skyscrapers that might be 2,000 stories high, and you might have a crop cycle that takes, 3 days. And so those are all things that would also simultaneously evolve so that they can accommodate the constraints that get created because of the developments that happen in certain areas. And I feel like that's the same over here. Is like when people say, I think humans are going to be sitting on a beach, have nothing to do, and AI is going to do everything. I just chuckle a little bit because I just refuse to believe that humans are designed to be obsolete, and so we will continue to find ways to add value and think creatively. And that doesn't mean that we'll be doing what we do today. It might very well mean that all the jobs that we do today might not be the jobs that we have, but that also doesn't mean that we're not going to have jobs, because the desire for a human to be productive and add value to society doesn't go away because something got automated. You just create higher order bits that you're then able to go focus on that you were not able to focus on in the past.
Exactly. And then just to make sure that I can get this thrown back in my face later, yeah, I'm predicting massive increases in employment, not decreases. No one since the internet is doing less than they were before the internet, despite all the progress possible. I can't believe that that's not going to happen again. I think we're headed towards the opposite direction.
I think you'll see some displacement of jobs temporarily, which we should not take lightly because I think it'll cause human suffering. But that does not mean that that will be the state in perpetuity. And what you have to keep in mind is that displacement period, if we get ahead of it because of the pattern that we're starting to witness, we might be able to actually get society retrained in a more efficient way than we might have done in the past with previous disruptions. And that might be a responsibility that the tech community, the collaboration between the public and private sector should have as a good beneficial outcome, because I think there's going to be more and more of a need for collaboration across different sectors. And this is one of those areas where I tend to be in the long term an optimist without being naive about the short-term implications that this might have, or even mid-term implications it has around safety and security, and the downside effects could be profoundly consequential that we have to keep in mind. But I refuse to believe that we're going to be obsolete or that we're not going to have value to add. It just seems unnatural.
Yeah, I think that's well put, that we can have a positive aggregate effect, but still have lots of heterogeneity in how that average plays out across society. And being naive about that is going to hurt us in the long run. You mentioned security, though, and when we were talking about re-racking and infrastructure changes, we quickly slipped towards, routers and modems and telecom and hardware-oriented things. But one of the things that I think you're very focused on in terms of infrastructure is the idea of security, and how does that become a first-class player versus the thing that's derided as hampering productivity. So we've always had this sort of productivity, security trade-off. I think that you've mentioned that we may not be making that trade-off anymore. How can we help the security be part of the infrastructure?
Firstly, I think in this particular age, security is going to be a prerequisite for successful adoption of AI. Because if people don't trust these systems, they're not going to use them. And so that's very different from in the past, where you would think about security as a necessary productivity impediment. That's no longer the case. Now it just happens to be a prerequisite for successful adoption of AI. But I feel like it's probably worth taking a step back even and saying, where are we still thinking very linearly? Like where I feel AI is underhyped the most is the fact that we still keep thinking that this is just a productivity game. Humans are going to get more productive. Things are going to happen cheaper, faster, better. I actually feel that's only the first order effect. The second order effect is you will actually start to see these AI models. And it's not even clear if large language models will be the ultimate destination. You'll have large world models, you'll have physical models, all of these things will start kind of combining together. But the new paradigm, whatever it ends up being, at some point in time, and the existing ones will start to create original insight that did not exist in the human corpus of knowledge. It won't just be an aggregation mechanism. It won't just be where you take multitude of different perspectives. And this is not just a better search engine where humans had some data and you indexed that data well and you were able to go out and put it into a clean paragraph. It's going to start creating original insights that didn't exist in the human corpus of knowledge. And when that happens, the thing that changes is you are now able to imagine solving problems that you could never even dream of solving before.
We're back with another segment of our branded interview series with Dr. Ananya Mukherjee, Vice Chancellor of Shivnadar University. To recap, Shivnadar is a private university founded in India in 2011. Dr. Mukherjee, thanks for taking the time to share a bit about your institute. Welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me.
Last time you mentioned the 3 areas of research that Shivnadar University is focused on. Can you describe those in more detail?
The first one is responsible AI. So few universities in the global south are focused on this theme in a comprehensive way. And our aspiration is to lead in this space. Right now, we are continuously confronted with this binary of utopia and dystopia of AI. But our goal is to be able to go beyond that and really think of responsible AI as a way in which we can maximize the benefits of AI and minimize its potential harm. The second area in which we are trying to grow is AI and health. As you know, India's health system operates at a scale unlike any other. We have vast patient volumes, immense diversity, complexity, issues of access, and so on. We believe that AI opens up a whole new frontier, which we are very committed to, and the collaboration across disciplines can happen and can create measurable social impact. So our goal here is to bring together scientists, engineers, educationists, public policy specialists, ethicists, and ordinary citizens to create some new ways of looking at health, which will have immense social advantage, particularly for underprivileged groups. Our third area in which we are going to focus is on curriculum and pedagogy for an AI world. So we want to build on our recognized strength of this research-infused interdisciplinary curriculum, and we want to focus on preparing our students for an AI world.
That sounds great. Thanks for joining us. Do you have a website that prospective students should visit?
Yes, we would encourage people to visit our website, snu.edu.in/home. That is where you would find everything about us.
And that is far beyond just going out and optimizing for productivity. And I feel like that's the most misunderstood part of AI is, oh, I'm just going to get more productive. Productive use is going to be like 10% of the equation. Going out and doing things you couldn't do before and solving problems you couldn't solve before in different ways that you couldn't even dream of solving before is probably going to be the 90% factor.
Yeah, I like that idea to observe the productivity effects first, because as you say, they're first order. But how do people start thinking about what they can do with that 90%? Productivity is pretty tempting. I mean, I like greater productivity. It's going to be hard for me to turn away from that, or, maybe turning away is me sort of making it a Hobson's choice where you have to do one or the other. But how do people start thinking about this 90% or these more than productivity options? I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who thought AI was underhyped, and I think we're on record for saying that here.
I think where it's overhyped is where the human obsolescence becomes almost a foregone conclusion in some people's minds. I think that's where it's overhyped, because I feel like human instinct and human judgment is still pretty hard to go out and replicate in the machine's ability to do things, because we don't make most of our decisions based on data. We make a lot of our decisions based on gut, and that gut is hard to go replicate. And typically, people say, listen to your gut, because there's a reason for it. There's an instinct that's palpable. But to go back to your question, or what should companies be thinking about? And by the way, I think I highly encourage the productivity argument. I think everyone should go out and think about productivity, and they should continue to keep kind of powering through that. It's going to be a great benefit that we will all be recipients of. Where I think the unlock truly comes in is by actually trying to make sure that we challenge the conventional norms of thinking and ask ourselves the question of what problems have we been conditioned to think that we can't solve? And are those unsolvable moving forward just the way that they were in the past? And I feel like you'll actually start to find very different answers. I feel like we need more and more questioning that happens of the status quo. And the way to do that, in my mind, the one single thing is going to be the exponential difference, is you have to unlearn as much as you're learning. And unlearning requires that you actually inject new talent into the system at a very rapid pace, and then give creative freedom to that talent so that you're actually getting mentored by them just as much as you're mentoring them. And so this was a recent conversation I'd had at a conference I was at, where people were like, so entry-level jobs are going to go away, and we're just not going to hire early in career people, which in my mind seems like the stupidest idea that a company could pursue. Because if you actually don't hire new people to come in, you have essentially given up of injection of new talent and new ideas into the thought process. And so this kind of baggage of experience will always hold you back, because you know a lot of things and you might not be, as a company, good at unlearning. And you have no one else to actually instigate that unlearning and catalyze that unlearning by asking questions, because they didn't have the baggage of knowing. I do feel like the continued infusion of talent early in career is going to be so important for companies to be able to get the most out of it, because we have to understand instinctively how to go out and use these tools, which are in service of humans, in a very different way than the way that we might have used them in the past. And right now, frankly, if you take someone who is a 20-year-old and a 28-year-old and compare the two of them and how they use AI, it's night and day different. A 28-year-old might actually use it for productivity. They'll go out and they'll ask it some questions because they've got some answers to get, and then they'll move on. A 20-year-old thinks of it like a companion and a brainstorming partner. And they might actually talk to it and brainstorm with it so that they can come to an ideation. They're not looking for answers. They're looking for substantive volleying back and forth and brainstorming. I learned that from the interns that would come into Cisco. And so I think that's the aspect that I think we have to keep in mind, that as a company, we have to make sure that we keep challenging and disrupting ourselves before someone else disrupts us. And by the way, innovation is not limited. Like, this is the one thing that people kind of bucket into these completely unproductive ways, which is, you're a small startup, you innovate really fast, you become large, you stop innovating. I think it's nonsense, because innovation is not like something that's limited to a certain group of people. Anyone can choose to innovate at any point in time. You just have to have the right mental model and mindset. And what you have to do is fight the temptation for bureaucracy being something that you succumb to. And so challenge the bureaucracy and allow people to come in that challenge the status quo. And you will, by definition, the byproduct of that is going to be invention.
The unlearning idea really hits home for me. I think we're going to have to cut that from the episode, because I don't want my kids to hear it and then think that I am not, full of wisdom and that their ideas are important. But it appeals to me because, many of the things that I think that got me to where I am in my career are not necessarily the things that seem like they're going to keep me going through the next phase of my life. And so that unlearning makes sense. But at the same time, I have trouble knowing what things I should unlearn and what things I shouldn't unlearn. And I feel like companies have to have that same problem. They got successful through some strategic core competency. And, the idea that, oh, yeah, we unlearn everything seems too global to me. So how do we decide?
I don't think you have to unlearn everything. I think humans build on top of each other's learnings. And one of the most important inventions that ever was created was a printing press, because we were able to communicate the learning from one generation to the other in a way that was very concrete. And so the combination of language, script, and the printing press, and ultimate level of desire to share your knowledge with others, which is instinctive to us, and ultimate desire to learn from other people's learnings, which is also instinctive to us, was actually pretty valuable. So I don't believe that you should unlearn everything, but I believe that pairing up experience with inexperience is really valuable. And if you can make sure that there's a bi-directional mentorship that's occurring in your ethos of your organization, where the experienced people are coaching the early entrants. And by the way, by early entrants, I don't always mean young people, because I could be inexperienced in a brand new domain. And so sometimes I have to force myself to just go into uncomfortable spots and go into new domains where I can learn new things and I can ask questions that might not be conventional wisdom. What I think is really important is conventional wisdom helps many times, and many times conventional wisdom prevents us from exploring something that we want to explore, and then thereby creates barriers that are unnecessary. And so that's what we have to kind of undo. That's the area that I feel like there's opportunity for organizations thinking differently, is don't just mentor your interns, have a reverse mentorship program as well. So if you're spending an hour with an intern, make sure that one of your key objectives is for 30 minutes of it, make sure you're getting something out of it, not just them. It's not one directional, it's bi-directional. I think I'm practicing what I'm preaching in this conversation that I had with you, because I've tried to always go into areas that I knew nothing about. And I found that that keeps me curious, that keeps me motivated, that keeps me learning. And it also allows me the permission to ask silly questions, which then free me from the burden of experience sometimes that I have to have in certain areas. And then in other areas, just number of years in the system teach you patterns that, as long as you don't think those patterns are non-shiftable, then you actually benefit from them. I always think of like strong opinions loosely held as a good model, which is completely flippable with new arguments and new data. The reason I got into computers was because some uncle told me the night before that, hey, it seems like I would be better than going into business management. So I took computers as a class, and then I got into that and got interested. And from there, you get into consulting. And then I did consulting for a long time. I started my own business. And then the consulting thing got boring after a while, because I didn't feel like I had exponential scale in that business. And I wanted to learn scale because I was fascinated with scale. So I got into software. And from software, one thing led to the other. And I got into product. And products were kind of fun to use because you started doing things in the cloud. And then the cloud became fun because now you're starting to benefit from AI. The formula that I've used is, don't ever fight a megatrend and use it as a tailwind. And know the difference between a megatrend and a hype cycle. So if you can go out and effectively deduce what is a megatrend, what is the hype cycle, not fight the megatrend and ignore the hype cycle, you have an advantageous position in society. Now, by the way, the instructive question is, how do you know the difference? And in my mind, there's a simple formula, which is, if it requires a PhD for someone to explain what the benefit of something is, it is a hype cycle. If it's something that is instantly obvious on what the benefit could be, where you could imagine 5 steps forward, it is likely a megatrend.
So one of the things that we like to do on the podcast is I mean, we've had a very conversational oriented so far. Let me switch to be just rapid fire questions and just give me the first thing that comes off your mind. What's moving faster about artificial intelligence or slower than you expected?
What's moving faster is the rate of change, and what's moving slower is the use cases that organizations are actually starting to find tangible value from. I think the technology is moving fast, the adoption is moving slower.
Mm-hmm. What's been the best use of artificial intelligence so far for you personally?
Research. Getting dexterous in a particular domain in a fraction of the time of what it could be in the past is something that I don't think I would have been able to do my job currently and have taken that job on and been able to get to speed as fast if it weren't for AI. I am a direct benefactor of AI. My family would not be fed the way it is today if AI wasn't around. It's that simple.
What do you wish that AI could do better, or what frustrates you about AI?
I think we are still in a very kind of chat-based interface, yet I think we are squarely entering into the next phase, which is agents being able to conduct tasks and jobs fully autonomously. I still do a lot of things I hate doing in my day that I think at some point in time AI will take off my plate, and I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, amen to that. Has using artificial intelligence made you spend more time with technology or less?
More. Because I'm just curious. So I spend like from 9 to midnight every night almost in my learning mode, which is something I never really did quite that religiously before AI.
Well, it's been fascinating talking with you and learning from these. I like the phrase about never fighting a megatrend. And if you're right about AI being underhyped, which I think you've made some cogent arguments for, then we're in the middle of a real shift. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. In 2 weeks, I'll be joined by Kathleen Peters, Chief Innovation Officer at Experian. Please tune in.
Thanks for listening to Me, Myself, and AI. Our show is able to continue in large part due to listener support. Your streams and downloads make a big difference. If you have a moment, please consider leaving us an Apple Podcasts review or a rating on Spotify, and share our show with others you think might find it interesting and helpful.